A demographic crisis is inevitable. For years we've heard scientific sources tell us that birth rates within developed countries are in decline, most especially in the global west. The total fertility rate by region in Europe stands at an average of 1.6, well below the bare minimum replacement rate of 2.1. In North America it stands at 1.8, even Latin America is falling behind at just 2.0. But this isn't just a fluke decline and an inevitably exponential upward growth of the total population, nor is it exclusive to the West. This trend of decline has been and is virtually assured to continue globally. In Asia, birth rates have fallen from nearly 6.0 on average in 1950 to 2.2 in present day. In Oceania, where Asian and Western elements meet, we find a fertility rate of 2.4, down from just over 4.0 in 1950. Only Africa has managed to remain well above replacement level into the modern day, but even this present rate of 4.4 is a steep fall from the rate of nearly 7.0 in 1950. With present trends suggesting a rapid population crash on that continent is imminent, estimated to bring it to just 2.0 by the end of the century. China, hailed as a population giant and once having so rapidly rising a population that it sought to stabilize this growth through a one-child policy, now finds itself with a fertility rate of just 1.4, despite having repealed this policy. The similar population titans of the Indian subcontinent have likewise fallen dramatically from an average rate of nearly 7.0, with only Pakistan remaining above replacement level. The causes behind this population decline are numerous and really worthy of their own video. What we'll instead be discussing in this video is what this demographic crisis means for our future. A shrinking or stagnant population means a number of things, but in an economically competitive world, it essentially means a smaller workforce and fewer taxpayers. A smaller workforce means production will decline, meaning GDP will decline, meaning less money will be available to invest domestically, in infrastructure, in defense, in health and welfare. Standard of living declines and taxes must be raised or government spending severely cut back, something politicians are generally unwilling to do in a competitive globalist order. With fewer employees, businesses must grow more efficient through automation of several jobs, downsize their operations, or face collapse. While for a time the population shift will create a brief surplus of jobs which will need to raise their wages in order to compete for a more limited supply of workers, the ultimate need to scale back, automate, or shut down will make job opportunities scarcer, likely leading certain non-essential industries to collapse entirely, especially in the entertainment, leisure, and service fields, as fewer people are able to afford these conveniences and luxuries. The rise in wages and the expense that will of course be shouldered by the businesses employing them will ultimately make the products and services of these jobs all the more expensive, effectively cancelling out any benefit the raised wages would have provided. This will be especially consequential when it impacts the agricultural sector and the price of food skyrockets. A lack of desire to work low-skilled jobs will further complicate the situation, as statistics from the COVID pandemic have shown a significant dropout from the labor force, as well as a hesitance to budge from a current or previous sector to make ends meet in a lesser-skilled job, even if only temporarily. What this means is that when times get hard, the population increasingly turns to the government for financial support, rather than attempt to make money in a field that might be considered unglamorous or physically demanding. Much as we saw during the decline of the COVID pandemic, with the population out of work but coasting off of government aid, businesses will lower their hiring standards in order to draw in more employees, something almost certain to cause an upset among those who had previously only been able to obtain their jobs through the acquisition of an expensive college degree or rigorous training. For certain fields, this will be a proper and much needed return to equilibrium because frankly, a college education is superfluous for a wide range of white-collar jobs and virtually needless across the board for any lesser skilled job. Particular vocational and skill-based jobs are certain to remain in high demand, and the cost for these forms of education could be expected to rise, whilst college admissions crash and a restructuring of the education system both from within and from outside will become necessary to maintain a small, highly educated workforce to meet the demands of a small but high-demand economic niche. This fertility decline, which has been ongoing for decades, is no doubt a key motivating factor in the increased demand by politicians to increase immigration flow from poorer or less developed countries where fertility rates are higher. In essence, there is an effort to cushion the blow of the demographic collapse so that when it occurs, the economic impact is not as severe and as a consequence, political instability is avoided. However, this has proven to be a very faulty strategy as immigrant populations have become increasingly supported by federal aid at the expense of the citizenry, welfare use within the US being dramatically higher among immigrant groups than among native-born populations. Further, fertility rates and willingness to work low-skilled jobs declines dramatically among most immigrant-descendant groups after just one generation and declines further with each subsequent generation, making mass immigration a band-aid solution to a fatal crisis and one which will have a greater consequence later down the line. As resources become scarcer and divides between immigrant and native populations remain, increased competition will naturally drive hostility between the two groups, and further within the various groups which make up the immigrant and immigrant-descended populations, as they attempt to look out for the best interests of themselves and their respective groups. States which have opted for this temporary solution will be forced to contend with further internal divides which will make emerging from the population collapse all the more difficult if in fact they can survive being torn in multiple directions from the diverging interests of various groups. While this population crash will impact a great majority of the world, smaller and more homogeneous countries will find themselves more capable of enduring the hardship and maintaining a state of national unity, whilst entities like the US, Brazil, Mexico, and to a lesser extent Russia and China will need to manage a great deal of internal unrest. Almost certainly states who can no longer afford to remain competitive on the global economic stage will retreat to protectionism and isolationism, focusing on restoring internal stability in their own local economies and taking a hard shift toward internal policy. Non-regionalist transnational entities like the UN, NATO, and perhaps even the International Monetary Fund would become unsustainable and dissolve. Entities like the EU and KANZK would stand a better chance given their level of integration at the local and regional level in the case of the EU, and the overall level of homogeneity and like-minded policy in regard to KANZK. Worse yet is what's to come. This demographic crisis is not the direct result of actions by this current youth generation, but the immediate generations which came before. This current generation faces additional hurdles of social and mental troubles brought on by excessive substitution of real-life interaction with that of the online world, troubles which make relationship and family building all the more difficult. Interest in starting families at all is at a dramatic low. Among men, sperm counts and testosterone levels are in heavy decline, while women are increasingly delaying trying for children to instead focus on work or study. This paints a picture of at least one more generation reinforcing the population crash and extending it by an additional 20 or 30 years. Is a global demographic crisis inevitable? Absolutely. Given current trends, it seems too late to prevent it now anywhere outside of Africa. It is now only a matter of how prepared we will be within our individual countries when this crisis arrives, how severely each country will be impacted, and which countries will emerge on top in the aftermath. The US of Z thanks for watching. This last month has kept us a bit busier than usual, but we'll be back to our typical schedule of alternate history and geopolitics videos very soon, so be sure to stay tuned, and if you haven't already, do subscribe right now and like the video if you're looking forward to seeing more. Mr. Z,